I spent 3 years hiding my son from the world. From him. But the moment the coldest Enigma on campus knelt in front of my child, and whispered, "Why does he have my eyes?" I knew my past had finally come to destroy me. The child was gone for less than 4 minutes. 4 minutes was all it took for 3 years of careful living to begin collapsing at the seams. Yoon Haewon felt it before he saw it, that particular cold that moves through a parent's chest when the small person who is supposed to be within arm's reach is suddenly, terribly not. He had stepped away from the children's center entrance just long enough to check the document notification on his phone. One alert. 12 seconds of distraction. And when he looked up, Seo was no longer standing beside the painted gate where Haewon had told him, firmly, the way he told him everything, to wait. Haewon's eyes swept the garden path, the stone steps, the cluster of cherry trees near the east wall. His throat tightened before his mind caught up to why. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. He found Seo in the east courtyard, and his blood went completely cold. His son, 3 years old, small enough to disappear in a crowd, enormous enough in presence to stop one, was standing directly in the path of Kang Jiwon. Not near him. Not beside him. In front of him. Close enough that the shadow Jiwon cast in the late afternoon light fell across Seo's upturned face like a curtain dropping. Haewon could not move. His feet understood something his mind was still refusing to process. Because Kang Jiwon, the man whose photograph on the board of directors' wall had stopped Haewon's heart on his very first morning back at Hanwul, had crouched down. Slowly. Deliberately. The way a man crouches when something has knocked the certainty straight out of him, and his legs simply will not hold the weight of it standing up. His dark eyes moved across Seo's face with an expression Haewon had no name for, not confusion, not curiosity, something older and more dangerous than both. The same sharp jaw. The same quality of stillness that Haewon had spent 3 years watching in his son and choosing not to examine too closely. The same eyes, not similar, not reminiscent, the same, looking back at each other across a distance of about 18 inches and 3 years of buried truth. Seo tilted his head. Considered the stranger the way he considered everything, seriously. Without performance, like a small person who understood that the world did not always deserve his trust and was deciding, in real time, whether this particular corner of it did. Then his mouth opened. "Papa?" The word landed in the courtyard like something thrown from a great height. Haewon felt it hit him in the chest. Felt the 3 years, the apartment outside Incheon, the tutoring sessions, the mornings when Seo reached for his face before sunrise, the locked door he had built around this exact moment, felt all of it fracture along a single clean line. Kang Jiwon went completely still. And then, slowly, with the measured control of a man who had just been shaken by something he did not have language for, he raised his gaze across the courtyard, and found Haewon staring back. Haewon did not sleep that night. He lay on his side in the dark with Seo warm and entirely unbothered against his back, one small fist curled near his mouth, breathing the slow, even breath of a child who had no idea he had just detonated something. Haewon stared at the wall and counted the reasons he could not run. The contracted position. The housing allowance tied to it. Seo's enrollment application for Hanwul's affiliated early program. An opportunity Haewon had told himself justified coming back here, justified all of it. The reasons were solid. Reasonable. They did not stop his hands from being cold. By morning, he had made a decision. He would keep his head down, maintain his schedule, and give Kang Jiwon nothing further to look at. The courtyard had been an accident, Seo wandering, bad timing, a collision that meant nothing if Haewon refused to let it mean anything. He told himself this while walking Seo to the children's center. He told himself this while badging into the research building. He told himself this so many times that by mid-morning it had started to sound almost true. Then Park Tail sat down across from him in the staff lounge with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that made Haewon's stomach drop before a single word was spoken. Tail was the kind of person who carried other people's problems gently. He had that quality, rare in an institution built on hierarchy and competition, of making whoever he was speaking to feel like the most important person in the room. Right now, he was using that quality to deliver something he clearly did not want to say. He set 1 cup in front of Haewon, wrapped both hands around his own, looked at the table for a moment. "Your access logs were pulled yesterday," he said quietly. "Your department supervisor got a sealed request. I only know because Min Jae in administration mentioned it before she realized she shouldn't." He paused. "Your contracted role is being reviewed. Not for performance." Another pause, careful and deliberate. "Someone is asking questions, Haewon. Quiet questions. The kind that don't need to be loud because the answers always show up anyway." Haewon stared at his coffee. The steam rose and disappeared. He said nothing. Tail leaned forward, voice dropping further. "Whatever it is, whatever you're hiding, he's already started looking." He did not say the name. He did not need to. Haewon walked back to his office 20 minutes later with the particular composure of someone who has decided that falling apart is not currently an option. He pushed open the door, crossed to his desk, set down his bag. On the desk, centered with the kind of deliberate placement that made absolutely clear it had not been left by accident, was a small card. Cream-colored, heavy stock. No letterhead. No signature. Just 2 lines of text, a time, and a room number. Haewon picked it up. Read it twice. Set it back down. His hands were steady. The rest of him was not. "Tell us what you think is on that card. Leave your reaction below. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is exactly the time." The room was on the 4th floor of the administration wing, the kind of space that existed for meetings that were never meant to appear in any official record. Haewon arrived 2 minutes early because arriving late to Kang Jiwon felt like a concession he could not afford, and he needed every small advantage available to him, even ones that existed only in his own mind. The door was already open. Jiwon stood at the window with his back to the room. He did not turn when Haewon entered. He let the silence sit, not uncomfortably, not as a power move, simply as the natural state of a man who had no interest in filling space with sound that served no purpose. He was dressed the way Haewon had seen him dressed every time he had caught a glimpse from across a corridor, and immediately looked away. Dark, clean lines, nothing unnecessary. His hands were clasped behind his back. The Seoul skyline pressed gray and enormous against the glass behind him. Then he turned. And whatever Haewon had prepared himself to see, coldness, accusation, the particular blankness of a powerful man who had decided someone was a problem to be managed, was not what was there. Jiwon's face was composed. But underneath the composure, something was working. Something that had not finished deciding what it was yet. He crossed to the table without a word and laid down 4 documents. One by one, with the unhurried precision of a man who already knew every answer and was simply waiting for the formality of confirmation. Haewon's withdrawal papers from Hanwul, dated 1 week after the Celestial Mask Festival, 3 years ago. Seoa's birth record pulled from the civil registry, showing a date that required no calculation to understand. The child's registered name, Yoon Haewon, and 1 field, in the section for paternal information, left entirely blank. And a single photograph, taken the previous afternoon in the east courtyard, printed in clean black and white. The child. Jiwon crouching. 2 faces in profile, turned toward each other. The resemblance in the photograph was not subtle. It was architectural. Jiwon did not gesture toward the documents. Did not explain them. He simply looked at Haewon across the table with dark, level eyes and said, very quietly, "Tell me I'm wrong." Haewon looked at the photograph. Looked at the birth record with its deliberate blank space. the blank space he had filled in with 3 years of silence and early mornings and the fierce, exhausting love of a person determined to be enough. Looked back at Jiwon. And said nothing. Because the documents had already said it. Because Seo's face had already said it. Because some truths are so complete that adding words to them would only be a kind of insult to how long they had waited to be acknowledged. Something moved through Jiwon's expression, there and gone, fast as a shadow passing under water. His jaw tightened once. Then he asked one more question. His voice had changed, not louder, not harder, but stripped of something. Every layer of performance, of institutional authority, of the careful distance he kept between himself and the world. What remained was just a man, asking something that mattered. "Did you know who I was that night?" "No," Haewon said. "I didn't know your name. I didn't know your face. I knew a silver mask and a voice and the way you looked at me like you were trying to solve something." He sat down, not because Jiwon had asked him to, but because his legs had quietly decided the conversation required it. "I didn't know anything about you until my first morning back here. I saw your photograph in the lobby and I stood in front of it for almost a full minute before I convinced myself I was wrong." He pressed his hands flat on the table. "I wasn't wrong." Jiwon sat across from him, still, listening with the complete, uninterrupted attention of a man who understood that information was worth more than reaction. Haewon told him the rest. Not everything, not yet, but the shape of it. The withdrawal, filed quietly under personal circumstances because the truth was not something he could write on any form. The apartment outside Incheon. The tutoring work. The way he had built a life from scratch with a ferocity born entirely from necessity. Because Seo was coming whether the world made room or not, and Haewon had decided early that his son would never feel the weight of being unwanted. He told Jiwon about Seo the way he had never been able to tell anyone, not as evidence, not as an explanation, but as a person. How he laughed at things no 3-year-old should find funny, with a timing that felt almost deliberate. How he evaluated every new room from the doorway before deciding it was safe to enter. How he had, last month, stared down a neighbor's large and loudly barking dog without flinching, holding the animal's gaze with the calm certainty of someone who had assessed the threat and found it insufficient. "He has your stillness," Haewon said, and then stopped, because saying it out loud made it more real than he had allowed it to be for 3 years. Jiwon said nothing for a moment. His eyes had not left Haewon's face. Then carefully, the way a man moves when he is aware that the ground beneath him has changed and has not yet finished changing, he said. "I want to meet him. Not the way yesterday happened. Properly. A beat. I am asking, not requiring. But I am asking." Haewon's instinct was to say no, a hard, immediate no, built from 3 years of protective silence. What came out of his mouth instead was, "All right." He was still looking at Jiwon when he said it. He watched something shift in Jiwon's expression, small, controlled, but real. Then Jiwon said, low and precise, "There is something else you need to know about that night." His hand moved to his phone before he finished the sentence. He looked at the screen for one moment, then set it face down on the table without answering. "Not today. But soon." That silence, the one that followed, was the loudest thing in the room. Saturday morning arrived cool and pale, the kind of soul autumn light that made everything look like it was being filmed. Jiwon was already in the children's center garden when Haewon arrived with Seo, standing near the stone wall with his hands in his pockets, looking at the bare-branched trees with the focused attention of a man who had decided that whatever he was feeling about this moment was not relevant to getting through it. He was wearing dark slacks and a gray coat that probably cost more than Haewon's monthly stipend. He looked entirely, absurdly out of place in a children's garden. He also looked like he had been standing there long enough that the garden had started to feel like his. Seo saw him from the gate and stopped walking. Haewon felt his chest seize. He waited for the uncertainty, the shyness, the clutching of his hand that his son occasionally deployed when the world felt too large. It did not come. Instead, COO studied Jiwon from the gate with that measuring look, dark eyes moving over the man with the same unhurried assessment. He gave everything he encountered for the first time. Then he released Haewon's hand. Walked forward with the calm, self-contained confidence of someone who had already made a decision and was simply closing the distance. He stopped 2 feet from Jiwon and pointed at the ground near the garden wall. "There is a beetle," he said in the serious, declarative tone he used for information he considered important. "He has been in the same place for 3 days. I think he is building something." Jiwon looked down. Then he crouched, the same way he had crouched in the courtyard, that same motion that looked like it cost a man of his stature something to perform and was all the more striking for it. He studied the beetle with complete attention. "What do you think he is building?" he asked. His voice, directed at the child, had lost its institutional edge. It was quieter, more careful, like something being handled gently for the first time. COO considered the question. "A house," he decided. "Or a plan." Something crossed Jiwon's face that Haewon had not seen there before. It was not quite a smile. It was the thing that existed in the moment before a person allows themselves to smile, when the feeling arrives ahead of the permission. He did not look up at Haewon. But Haewon felt it anyway, from the bench where he sat pretending to look at his phone, his eyes tracking every second of this with an ache he had no category for. When they walked back through campus an hour later, COO between them, chattering now about the relative merits of different types of stone for beetle habitats, COO reached up without any announcement and wrapped his small hand around Jiwon's fingers. Jiwon's stride did not break. He did not look down. He simply let it happen, and his hand closed around COO's with the quiet certainty of something inevitable. Haewon glanced sideways at Jiwon to see if he was all right, and found Jiwon already looking at him. Not at COO. At him. Dark eyes, steady and direct, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the child between them and everything to do with something that had no name yet but was gathering one. The look lasted 1 second too long before Jiwon turned his gaze back to the path ahead. Haewon looked forward too. His heart was doing something it had no business doing. That moment, that look, tell us you felt it too. Leave a comment, share this with someone who lives for this kind of tension, and make sure you are subscribed. Jiwon did not ease into it. He sat across from Haewon in the same 4th-floor room where the documents had been laid out like a verdict, and he told the truth the way he did everything, directly, without decoration, without asking permission first. 2 years ago, his personal investigator had begun reconstructing the gap in his memory from the night of the Celestial Mask Festival. Not because Jiwon had ordered it with any particular urgency. Because unresolved variables bothered him, and that black wall in his recollection, that hard, seamless nothing where a night should have been, had never stopped bothering him the way other forgotten things eventually did. The investigation had taken 14 months. What it returned was not a gap caused by too much alcohol. The compound identified in a preserved blood sample from a routine physical taken 4 days after the festival was pharmacological, specific, deliberate, the kind of thing that moved through elite Enigma circles the way rumors move through lesser ones. Quietly. Purposefully. Leaving no trail that a person without resources could ever follow. "The target was me," Jiwon said. "The method was the festival's anonymity. Whoever arranged it knew I would be there and understood that a crowd of masked students provided the kind of cover that does not require much else." His voice did not change temperature as he said it. He delivered it the way he delivered everything, as fact stripped of the drama it deserved. "I was not supposed to remember anything. I was not supposed to go looking. I did both, eventually. What I could not find was you." Haewon sat very still. The late afternoon light came through the window at a low angle and fell across the table between them. His hands were in his lap. His mind was doing something he could feel physically, rearranging 3 years of a story he thought he understood, shifting every piece 1 degree to the left so that the whole shape of it changed. "So either of us chose that night," he said finally. It was not a question. It was the only sentence that fit what had just been handed to him. "No," Jiwon said. Then he was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man measuring something against the cost of saying it out loud. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to the register he used only in rooms with no witnesses. "But I find I cannot bring myself to wish it hadn't happened." Haewon looked up sharply. Jiwon's eyes were already on him. Dark, steady, and carrying something that had no armor around it, no institutional distance, no careful blankness. Just the statement, sitting in the air between them, and Jiwon making absolutely no move to take it back. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything neither of them had said yet, pressing against the walls of the room like weather. Park Tae-il was waiting outside Haewon's office door when Haewon arrived the next morning, and the expression on his face made Haewon stop walking before he reached him. Tae-il was not an anxious person. He carried things lightly, navigated Hanwul's internal politics with a kind of cheerful pragmatism, and had never once in the 3 weeks Haewon had known him look like he was about to deliver news that required bracing for. He looked like that now. His hands were wrapped around a coffee cup he clearly was not drinking from. His eyes moved to Haewon and then immediately to the corridor behind him, checking. "Someone was asking about COO," Tae-il said low and fast the moment Haewon was close enough. "Not here. Outside. A man went to the neighborhood association near your old building in Incheon. He was asking the neighbors how long you lived there, whether you had family, whether anyone had seen the child's father." He paused. "This was 3 days ago. One of my contacts recognized your name and reached me this morning." His voice dropped further. "It is not Jiwon's people. His investigators work internally. This was external, Haewon. Someone else is looking." Haewon felt the cold arrive in his chest and spread outward. He pushed open his office door, and Tae-il followed him inside, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Later, 2 hours later, after Haewon had sat through a research meeting where he retained nothing and nodded at appropriate intervals, he found Jiwon. Not by arrangement. By the same gravitational pull that had been operating between them since the courtyard, the one Haewon had been pretending he couldn't feel. Jiwon was crossing the east corridor toward the administrative wing when Haewon stepped into his path, and the look on Haewon's face made Jiwon stop immediately. Haewon told him what Tae-il had said. All of it, plainly, without softening it. Jiwon listened without moving. His expression did not change. But something behind it did, a shift in the quality of his attention, the way a room shifts when the temperature drops by 10 degrees all at once. When Haewon finished, Jiwon was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, "I understand why you ran. I am not a safe person. I have never claimed to be." A beat that landed like a stone in still water. "But CO is mine. And so is the responsibility. Whether you allow it or not." It was not a comfort. It was not meant to be. It was the most honest thing Haewon had heard in 3 years, and it hit him harder than comfort could have. "Tell us, are you scared for them? Because you should be. Drop your reaction in the comments, and stay close." The bags were already packed when Haewon got back to his campus apartment that evening. 2 of them, sitting by the door with Seoa's small backpack resting on top, the one with the embroidered turtle on the front that Seo had selected himself and would not be separated from. Haewon stood in the doorway and looked at the bags. Then he looked at the man who was standing in the kitchen with his phone in his hand, Jiwon, who had apparently let himself in using a master access code that Haewon did not have and had not been offered, because Kang Jiwon did not ask for access to things he had decided were already his responsibility. "I have not agreed to this," Haewon said. "I know," Jiwon said. He put his phone away. His voice was completely even. The inquiry in Incheon was run by a member of the Shim family network. They became aware that I acknowledged a child last week. An Enigma-born heir carried by an Omega is not a common event. It draws attention from people who trade in exactly that kind of leverage. He looked at Haewon with the direct, unblinking clarity of a man who had stopped managing other people's reactions to hard information a long time ago. My residence on the north side of campus has security that this building does not. There is a car outside. I am asking you to use it. Haewon looked at the bags. Looked at Seo, who had emerged from the bedroom holding the turtle backpack by one strap and was watching the two adults in his apartment with those dark, measuring eyes. Seo looked at Jiwon. Then back at Haewon. Then he walked across the room, picked up his bag properly, and put it on his back with the decisive energy of a child who had already made up his mind. Haewon exhaled through his nose. We are having a conversation about boundaries, he said. A real one. Yes, Jiwon said, and held the door open. Jiwon's private residence was everything Haewon had braced himself for. Clean architectural lines, natural stone floors, the kind of quiet that cost money to build. Seo explored it with focused intensity, cataloging rooms the way he cataloged beetles. By 8 o'clock he had fallen asleep on the oversized couch in the main room, halfway through a story Haewon had been reading aloud, one hand flung out and resting against Jiwon's knee with the unconscious trust of a child who had decided, at some point during the past week, that this particular person was safe. Haewon sat on the other end of the couch. Jiwon had not moved. The apartment was warm and still and carried the impossible domestic weight of the three of them breathing the same air, and Haewon was doing everything he could to not look at the picture they made, the sleeping child between them, the lamplight, the silence that had stopped feeling like distance and started feeling like something else entirely. He was not succeeding. Then Jiwon's secured phone vibrated on the coffee table. Jiwon glanced at the screen. Every trace of the evening's quiet left his face in an instant. He stood. Moved Seo's hand from his knee with a gentleness that made Haewon's chest seize. Then he looked at Haewon with eyes that had gone completely still. Stay here, he said. Low. Absolute. Do not open the door for anyone. He was gone before Haewon could answer. He came back at 4:40 in the morning. Haewon heard the door before he saw it, a soft, controlled sound, the kind made by a man who has trained himself to move without announcing his presence. He was sitting at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea that had been cold for 2 hours, Seo still asleep on the couch behind him under a blanket Haewon had found in the hall closet. He had not slept. He had sat in the dark and listened to the building and counted the minutes and refused to examine too closely what it meant that he was counting them. Jiwon came through the door and closed it behind him. He was unhurt. Haewon could see that immediately. No visible damage, no torn clothing, nothing that looked like consequence. But he carried himself with a particular stillness, the kind that lived just after a man has done something that required the fullest expression of what he is, and has not yet finished becoming ordinary again. He set his phone on the entry table. Looked across the apartment. Found Haewon. Haewon stood up. He crossed the kitchen and stopped in front of Jiwon and looked at his hands, not because he was thinking about it, but because his body had decided it needed to know before his mind caught up to why. He turned Jiwon's hands over in both of his. Checked the knuckles. The wrists. The palms. There was a small cut on his left hand, already closed, and Haewon pressed his thumb against it once, lightly, and then did not let go. Jiwon watched him do this. He did not move. He did not speak. He stood inside the quiet of what was happening with the stillness of a man who had been handled carefully by no one in a very long time, and did not know what to do with it except remain still so it did not stop. Is it over? Haewon asked. His voice came out steadier than he felt. For now, Jiwon said. Which was not the answer Haewon wanted. It was the only honest one available, and they both understood that. Haewon nodded. He did not let go of Jiwon's hands. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the counter, and outside the window's soul was beginning its slow gray shift toward morning, and behind them COO breathed in and out in the reliable rhythm of a child who trusted completely that the adults in the room had handled it. Jiwon looked down at where Haewon's hands were still wrapped around his. Then he looked up. And what was in his face, finally, with no room left in the night for anything but this, was not controlled, not composed, not managed. It was the look of a man who had run out of walls. His voice, when it came, was the quietest Haewon had ever heard it. "I need to ask you something," he said. "And I need you to answer without running." Everything in Haewon went very still. He met Jiwon's eyes and held them. His answer, given without words, given simply by not moving, by tightening his grip instead of releasing it, was the most courageous thing he had done in 3 years. Jiwon asked him to stay. Not because the danger required it. Not as a strategic arrangement with conditions attached. He asked in the plainest language he had ever used with another person, standing in his own kitchen in the early gray of a Seoul morning, his hands still in Haewon's hands, his face entirely open in the way it had never been open for anyone else. He said that for 3 years he had carried a gap in his memory like a splinter too deep to locate, present in everything, felt in nothing, impossible to stop reaching for. He said that when he crouched in the east courtyard and a 3-year-old boy looked back at him with his own eyes, something had cracked open in him that he had spent his entire adult life ensuring would never crack open, and that he had no desire to close it. He said Haewon was right to have been afraid. He said he could not promise the world around them would become simple or safe, because that would be a lie, and he did not lie to people he intended to keep. What he could promise was this: that no family obligation, no board decision, no rival lineage, and no version of his legacy would ever sit above the 2 people in this apartment. Not now. Not in any future he was willing to build. He said it simply, looking straight at Haewon. Waiting. Haewon was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the morning light shifted slightly through the windows. Long enough that COO stirred once on the couch and settled back down without waking. Long enough for Haewon to feel the full weight of what he was about to choose, not the fear of it, but the actual weight of walking towards something instead of away from it, for the first time in 3 years. "I didn't run because I didn't want you," he said finally. His voice was low and steady and real. "I ran because I wanted you too much to survive losing you." The space between them disappeared. Not with noise, not with drama, with the quiet certainty of 2 people who had arrived, through fire and distance and one unmasked truth at a time, at the same place. 6 months later, COO was enrolled in Hanwul's early education program and was already the subject of 3 separate teacher reports, not for misbehavior, but for the disconcerting quality of his arguments during group activities and his habit of organizing the other children into what he called efficient formations. His teachers had started referring to him, in private, as the director. Haewon's contracted position had been converted to permanent staff, and his research on cross-cultural linguistic parallels had drawn the attention of a visiting academic consortium from 3 countries. He was building something real. He could feel it the way he could feel the morning, certain and growing and entirely his own. On a Sunday in early winter, with the Han River light coming cold and clean through the apartment windows, COO found the silver mask. It was in a box at the bottom of Haewon's second closet, packed 3 years ago with the deliberate hands of a man who could not bring himself to throw it away and could not explain why. COO pulled it out with both hands and turned it over with the focused reverence he gave to things he recognized as significant without knowing why. The silver caught the winter light. "What is this?" he asked. Haewon looked at the mask. Then across the room at Jiwon, who had looked up from his desk at the exact same moment. Their eyes met over the child's head, over the silver mask, over the 3 years, over everything that had started on a rain-soaked festival night when neither of them had known the other's name. Jiwon held his gaze with something in his expression that was quiet and full and entirely unguarded. The look said, "I know exactly what that is." The look said, "And I would not change a single night of it." Haewon looked back at his son. "It belongs to a story," he said. "A long one." COO turned the mask over once more. Considered it with those dark, serious eyes. Then, with the devastating instinct that had defined him since the courtyard, since the beetle, since the moment he reached up and took Jiwon's hand without asking, he looked between the two of them and nodded, as though confirming something he had already understood for quite some time. "Tell me," he said. And for the first time, Haewon realized he wanted to. "If this story moved you, if you felt Haewon's fear, if you held your breath during that morning in the kitchen, if COO broke your heart wide open, then this channel was made for you. Please subscribe right now and turn on notifications so that every news story we tell finds you first. Every week we bring you a new world, a new love, a new reason to stay until the very last word. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you, what moment hit the hardest, what line you are still thinking about, what you felt when COO picked up that mask. And if you know someone who needs a story like this one, someone who needs to be reminded that the things we run from sometimes turn into the things we were always running toward, share this with them today. You stayed until the end. That means everything. We will see you in the next story.